Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor, to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the Morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, independent media that won't reinforce tribalism. We have one planet. Nobody is leaving, so let us reason together. We're going to start off the show like we started off last time with a show question from a longtime listener. This is coming from Gene. The question is, morning, since the Supreme Court ruling on the legitimacy of Trump's tariffs may not be announced until June of 2026, how likely can his administration issue dividend checks for $2,000, as he continues to say? So, thank you for the amazing question. I always like to start off the show with something that I was not planning to talk about, something that you guys asked me to talk about. So let me put it to you like this. The Supreme Court, as you said, is not expected to rule on the case until 2026. So the translation is an aggressive tariff restructuring is sitting on the launch pad with a do not fly sticker on it. Why? Because if Trump actually wants to use the tariff revenue as a justification for $2,000 dividends, the entire plan is actually chained to the constitutionality of that question. If the court is saying the president can't unilaterally impose broad national tariffs without Congress, then the whole dividend check thing is a daydream, and that daydream evaporates like a hot mist in the hot Virginia morning. So, number two, could he still try to issue the checks anyway? Technically, he could propose anything. He could promise anything. He could even brand it, package it, reshare it, and market it like a stadium tour. But sending actual money out of the U.S. Treasury requires one of two things. A, an act of Congress. Congress must authorize spending, period. No workaround, no magic wand. Tariff revenue does not give the executive branch a unilateral spending power. B, emergency powers, unlikely and legally fragile. He could do it if he would try to claim some kind of economic emergency to redirect revenue. So sure, in that scenario, could the court smack it down within days? Absolutely. Every court from every district to appeal it would sprint toward that case like it was back, we were going back to Black Friday again, and they would love to slap down the president. Now, here's a third thing. The big problem is tariffs don't work like a piggy bank. This is where the political marketing gets kind of sketchy and sometimes cute. Tariffs are not a pot of gold that presidents get to hand out. Tariffs are taxes on imports, and the cost hits Americans, consumers, and that's economics 101. So if the president says we'll send every American $2,000 from tax revenue, what the president is actually saying is we'll tax purchases and imports, raise consumer prices, then recycle that money back to the people and we'll just call it a dividend. It's circular economics with a patriotic bow just wrapped on top of it. Now, the real barrier, which is this problem number 4, is the House of Representatives. Even if Trump won, he needs a cooperative Congress. If Democrats control the House, even a slice of Republicans resist it. If fiscal hawks start sweating, then the checks die in committee before anyone can even spell the word dividend. Here's the fifth political point, which is the political reality check. And this is the part of the show where, I let it lean in and so the listeners can hear it. Presidents don't cut checks. Congress do. And no president, red or blue, gets to send out a dime without legislators signing on the dotted line. This $2,000 idea, it's a campaign promise. It's a political fantasy. It's a soundbite engineered to go to TikTok Live. But as a governing policy, it has a structural integrity of a wet cardboard. Number 6, most likely to happen. And here's the clean cut, honest, put it on a t-shirt summary. Could Trump propose a 2000 tariff dividend? Yes. Could he send the checks without Congress? No. Would the pending Supreme Court case block the mechanism he's needed? Absolutely. Is June 2026 too late to build a legal foundation for those checks early in a term? 100%. This is more campaigning messaging than it is a fiscal reality. So no, in my opinion, the president is not mailing out tariff dividends in early 2025 or in early 2026 without a miracle of a supermajority and a Supreme Court's blessing. So the bottom line is this: Donald Trump can promise a tariff dividend, but he can't print one. Not without Congress, not without the Supreme Court case handing over the plan, and not without economics yelling, "Are you serious?" in the background. Tariffs aren't magic money, they are taxes, and checks don't go out until Congress signs the receipt. Thank you for the question. Here's our daily take. America wakes up every morning like a hungover empire pretending it merely had a late night. The Republic creaks, the citizens scroll, and the politicians, those actors who forgot they're in a play, step onto the stage to deliver lines that they didn't write and they don't understand. We keep insisting we're a nation of rugged individuals, yet we panic if the Wi-Fi buffers for more than 4 seconds. We worship freedom while begging someone to tell us what to think, and we talk endlessly about the founders as if they were sacred script they handed us, rather than a messy first draft written by men who disagree with each other more than we disagree with our cousins and uncles at Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, the great American pastime isn't baseball. It's actually blaming the wrong person. If something breaks, we blame the poor. If something explodes, we blame the foreigner. If something rots, we blame the youth. And never the powerful, of course. The powerful remain as innocent as newborn lambs, provided the lamb was born in a lobbyist's office and they already knew how to file PAC paperwork. And yet, despite all the nonsense, all the cheap theatrics, all the moral bankruptcy we've dressed up as news cycles, this country still contains a dangerous number of people who can think, people who can tell the difference between spectacle and substance, people who refuse to bow before the cult of incompetence masquerading as leadership. That's what keeps the whole thing from collapsing. Just enough stubborn souls who won't let mediocrity become a national religion. So here's today's take. America isn't dying. It's simply being managed badly. And yet, the only cure for bad management is citizens who stop making clowns for kings. Wake up, pay attention, and don't let anyone gaslight you into believing the circus is the cathedral. This republic isn't doomed. It's just overdue for house cleaning. What is a war crime? Ladies and gentlemen, every now and then, the world focuses us to revisit a supposedly agreed upon rule in the lines that we swore were too sacred to cross. And in the chaos of bombs and bullets and speeches, we have to pause for a moment and ask a simple, but I think important and devastating question. What is a war crime? Now, on paper, it's easy. A war crime is any deliberate act in conflict that breaks the laws of war. The Geneva Conventions, The Hague, the whole body of international agreements humanity drafted to keep warfare from sliding all the way back into barbarism. But we have to break this down into plain English. A war crime is when you kill people you weren't supposed to kill. It's when you torture the people you already captured. It's when you starve a population because it's easier than fighting an army. It's when you treat human beings like trash because the battlefield gave you an excuse. Bombing civilians, war crime. Torturing prisoners, war crime. Using chemical weapons, war crime. Turning women and children into bargaining chips, war crime. These aren't accidents of war. These aren't tragic necessities. These are illegal choices made by leaders and carried out by soldiers that spit right in the face of the laws that we claim to live by. You see, war has rules, not because war is moral, but because unchecked violence eventually gets to eat the entire world. After Nuremberg, humanity stood up and said, "We will not let I was following orders be a shield for cruelty ever again." To state it very plainly, a war crime is a moment when someone decides that power excuses total depravity, that power excuses wickedness. And history has shown us again and again that wickedness in uniform is still wickedness. Now, here is the uncomfortable truth. In war crimes, it's not something other countries do. Every nation with guns and grievances have been tempted to do this very act. Some have crossed the line. Some pretend they didn't. Some rewrite the story afterward. But the law doesn't care about your flag. The law doesn't salute your anthem. The law cares about civilians, the wounded, the captured, the people with the least power caught under the boots of the people with the most power. And that's why we talk about this on this show. Because if you want a world where accountability means something, if you want a military that stands for more than might, if you want a country that honors its own constitution instead of abusing it, then you have to understand the gravity of the phrase war crime. It's not political. It's not partisan. It's not negotiable. It's the line where humanity draws its final boundary and says, beyond this particular line, we will not go. Back with more in a moment.
Saw video of a second U.S. strike on a boat in the Caribbean.
And the public has seen a report on the defense secretary sharing sensitive information. What have we learned? And what questions remain?
I'm Michelle Martin with Steve Inskeep, and this is Up First from NPR News. Federal agents accused a suspect of planting 2 pipe bombs on the eve of the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
Let me be clear. There was no new tip. There was no new witness. Just good, diligent police work.
What led investigators to him?
Also, the Supreme Court overturned a lower court to side with Texas Republicans. The lower court found that a new congressional map probably discriminated by race. What reasons did the court give to set that aside? Stay with us. We'll give you the news you need to start your day.
This message comes from BetterHelp. The holidays are a time of traditions, like making your grandmother's pudding recipe, or watching that movie you've seen 1,000 times. Incorporating therapy into your life can help you take time for yourself during what can be a joyful but sometimes tough time of year. And by caring for yourself, you can show up more for the important moments. This December, start a new tradition by taking care of you. Visit BetterHelp.com/NPR for 10% off. Support for NPR and the following message come from Warby Parker, the one-stop shop for all your vision needs. They offer expertly crafted prescription eyewear, plus contacts, eye exams, and more. For everything you need to see, visit your nearest Warby Parker store or head to warbyparker.com. This message comes from VCU. What makes Virginia Commonwealth University so uncommon? As a top-ranked public research university, VCU is a respected powerhouse of innovation and creative problem-solving. With more than 240 programs, VCU offers real-world opportunities, including internships at Richmond's Fortune 500 companies, making it a university unlike any other. Learn more at vcu.edu.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Has anybody ever told you you were over-opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion. Don't talk about faith. Don't talk about politics. My name is Jerome McClain, host of Jerome McClain Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over-Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over-opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over-Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Over-Opinionated with Josh Scott, where he
guy telling you the truth. We talk about a lot of serious topics on this show. One very serious topic is women's health. One company that stood out to me was vslay.com because the owner is very transparent about her own struggles in the women's health department and has great customer service, great deals, and frequent sales. You can check her out, her great customer service, products about women's health, and frequent sales at www.vslay.com. That is www.vslay.com.
Members of Congress have now seen a video showing the second U.S. strike on a boat in the Caribbean. Democrats and Republicans interpreted it differently, but a few things became clear.
Democrats said they were disturbed by the second hit on a boat allegedly carrying drugs, killing 2 men after the boat was disabled. Republicans said the strike was justified because the 2 survivors of the first strike might have continued on to their destination. Yet even Republicans described the survivors in a desperate situation. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton said the survivors were, quote, trying to flip a boat, suggesting the boat had capsized after a U.S. missile strike, which other lawmakers confirmed.
That is one of 2 big stories focused on the Pentagon, and NPR Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman is covering both. Tom, good morning.
Hey, Steve.
Okay, so let's get this other story out of the way first. An Inspector General report is now public about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sharing information about an attack on the Signal texting app. What did you learn by reading the report?
Well, it said that 2 to 4 hours before the airstrikes by American F-18 pilots, Secretary Hegseth, he was getting a classified briefing from General Eric Kurilla about the upcoming attacks on Houthi rebels. A lot of detail about the number of planes, the targets, the timing. And while Hegseth was getting this, he was sharing it on a Signal chat with other officials and on another chat with his wife, his brother, and his lawyer. None of those 3 had security clearances, and all of this was secret information, the report said.
And let's just disclose, as we do, that NPR CEO Catherine Marr also chairs the board of the Signal Foundation, which has a subsidiary that makes this app. But what has been the reaction to the Inspector General?
Well, Secretary Hegseth's spokesman said the IG report exonerates him. That is not true. Nothing in the 76 pages says anything close to that. It does say that the Pentagon should be aware of proper procedures on the handling of classified information. It only states facts, Steve, not what should happen next.
All right. So let's now talk about this second strike on the boat in the Caribbean. What are lawmakers saying, and what are you learning now that they have seen this video and also heard from the commander involved?
Well, Admiral Mitch Bradley, the top commander overseeing Central and South America, appeared behind closed doors to explain what happened. Lawmakers said he defended that second missile strike, saying basically the survivors of the initial strike were still kind of being active, trying to reach their comrades by radio, trying to corral drugs on the boat that was nearly destroyed. So Bradley, again, ordered this second missile strike to kill them, and then 2 more to sink the boat. Secretary Hegseth said he was only there for the first missile strike on the boat and didn't see the others. He had meetings, he said. Now, lawmakers are asking, did this second missile strike result in an illegal killing, a war crime? Because, Steve, the Pentagon's Law of War manual lays out what is an illegal order that no service member has to obey. And the manual has this example. Get this, quote, for example, orders to fire upon the shipwrecked would be clearly illegal.
Tom, granting the differing interpretations, it does seem that everyone came out of the closed-door video session saying this boat was severely damaged at the least and even capsized. Any doubt about that?
I don't think there is. Senator Tom Cotton said these guys, the 2 survivors, are trying to flip over this capsized boat. Congressman Adam Smith and others said, listen, they were just shirtless guys and not much of this boat was above water. So that's why it's important, I think, for the public to see this video. It should be released.
NPR's Tom Bowman, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
The night before a mob of President Trump's supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th of 2021, somebody placed 2 pipe bombs outside the Republican and Democratic National Party headquarters, which are nearby.
For almost 5 years, the FBI tried to find the culprit, but came up empty until Thursday, when the Justice Department announced that federal agents had arrested a 30-year-old man suspected of planting those devices.
NPR Justice Correspondent Ryan Lucas is covering this, and he's with us now. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning.
So what can you tell us about this person who's now in custody, and what's he charged with?
Well, his name is Brian Cole Jr. He is, as you guys mentioned, 30 years old. He was arrested in Woodbridge, Virginia, which is about 20 or so miles south of D.C. Court papers say that he lives there with his mom and that he works in the office of a bail bondsman in Northern Virginia. Now, as for the charges, he's charged with transporting an explosive device with intent to kill, as well as attempted malicious destruction with explosive materials. Those are the charges as of this morning, but officials said yesterday that this is still very much an active investigation, and prosecutors could bring more charges down the road.
So for almost 5 years, the FBI has been trying to find the person who planted these bombs. Did officials say yesterday what, after all this time, led them to Cole?
All right, this has been a massive investigation to try to solve this mystery over the years. And remember, these pipe bombs didn't go off on January 6th, but they did draw police away from the Capitol that day, the day that rioters stormed the building. Now, officials said yesterday it wasn't a new tip that broke this case open. Here's Attorney General Pam Bondi speaking to reporters yesterday.
Let me be clear. There was no new tip. There was no new witness. Just good, diligent police work and prosecutorial work.
Now, FBI Director Kash Patel said the Bureau brought in a new team of investigators and experts to re-examine all of the evidence that the FBI had collected over the past 4+ years. And that new team sifted through all of the data. And Patel said that's what led to new investigative leads, including a critical forensic lead, he said. And ultimately, the road led to coal.
What evidence do the prosecutors have that allegedly ties coal to these pipe bombs?
Well, an FBI affidavit says that records of financial transactions show that Cole bought items that were the same as the components used to build the pipe bombs that were found. So galvanized pipes, end caps used to close the ends of the pipe bombs, steel wool, the same kind of white kitchen timers and red-black electrical wires. There's also cell phone location data that shows that Cole's cell phone was pinging cell towers in the area where the pipe bombs were left on the night that they were placed there. And then the affidavit says that a license plate leader picked up Cole's car getting off the interstate near the Capitol on the evening of January 5th, just in a half hour or so before the bombs were put in place.
Now, people might remember there have been a lot of conspiracy theories about these pipe bombs. Who left them? Why? Now that the suspect is in custody, do we know anything about the motive or whether these bombs were connected to the attack on the Capitol?
Well, those really are the million-dollar questions, and unfortunately, no. At this point, we don't know answers to those. Ironically, one of the conspiracy theories that was out there, that the pipe bombs were an inside job by the FBI, that was pushed by Dan Bongino when he was a podcaster. Dan Bongino is now the deputy director of the FBI, and he got a lot of credit yesterday for this arrest. Now, Cole is expected to appear in court here in D.C. later today, and answers to a lot of these outstanding questions are most likely to come in court over the weeks and months to come as the Justice Department prosecutes this case.
That's NPR's Ryan Lucas. Ryan, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the Supreme Court has given President Trump and the Republican Party a boost in their fight to skew the results of congressional elections.
Yesterday, the court said Texas may use a new congressional map designed to give Republicans a shot at 5 extra House seats in next year's election. The court turned aside a lower court ruling that found a likelihood that this new map is racially discriminatory.
NPR's Hansi-Lo Wong has been following the gerrymandering battle, which of course is nationwide. Many states now involved. Hansi, good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
Okay, so what was the lower court ruling that the Supreme Court says doesn't apply? They paused.
Well, this was a 3-judge panel that the majority ruling written by a judge nominated by President Trump. The Supreme Court has put a pause on this order. And this order by the lower court found that this congressional map Texas passed back in August is likely unconstitutional because it discriminates against voters based on race. This lower court ruling cited a letter that the Justice Department wrote to Texas officials and multiple public statements by key Republican state lawmakers involved in developing the map. And all suggests Texas lawmakers pass this map to eliminate existing districts in Texas where Black and Latino voters together make up the majority.
Oh, that's interesting. Why then did the Supreme Court say, no, you're wrong? Go ahead and use the map?
Well, a majority of conservative justices on the Supreme Court basically sided with Texas state lawmakers who have said they were not motivated by race and were driven instead to draw new districts that are more likely to elect Republicans. The court's majority wrote that the lower court ruling, quote, failed to honor the presumption of legislative good faith. And the majority also said the lower court, quote, improperly inserted itself into Texas's primary campaign by releasing its ruling last month in the middle of a candidate filing period.
I was reading the rather short ruling on this, rather short opinion, and I am fascinated by that idea that the court should have presumed that the Texas legislature did not mean to do it, that should be the presumption going in. Was there any dissent in this?
Yes, the court's 3 liberal justices dissented. Justice Elena Kagan wrote their dissenting opinion and said that the court's majority decision to allow Texas to use this map for next year's midterms, quote, ensures that many Texas citizens, for no good reason, will be placed in electoral districts because of their race, and that violates the Constitution.
I was interested also that the court ruling acknowledged the broader context here and said this is now spread to be a redistricting fight in state after state after state across the country. Where do things stand?
Yeah, there's a lot going on, but let's start with California. Voters in that state approved a Democratic-friendly congressional map last month to counter the Texas map that President Trump pushed for to help Republicans, and the Supreme Court is now allowing. And this month, a federal court is holding a hearing on whether to block California's map for the midterms. Last week, a different federal court ruled to allow North Carolina to use a new Republican-friendly map. Missouri's Republican-friendly map is still facing lawsuits and a referendum effort, and I'm keeping watch for potential new maps coming out of Florida, Indiana, New York, and Virginia.
Busy man. Is the Supreme Court done with this topic?
No, there's a major voting rights case I'm also watching about Louisiana's congressional map. The Supreme Court may rule on that very soon, and depending on what and when the court decides in that case, there may be another wave of congressional gerrymandering, particularly in southern states.
NPR's Hansi-Lo Wong, thanks for the update.
You're welcome, Steve.
And that's
those who make peaceful transitions of power that difficult will force violent changes of power inevitable. I am paraphrasing John F. Kennedy, who said something similar. Let's go to these. I may do a whole show about this scandal in voting, which kind of gives the game away that voting is not a right that is not filtered and fettered by the people in power. And this is not anything new. It's just giving the game away that voters don't pick the politicians. Politicians pick the voters. And now we can play this game like it's a Democrat-Republican thing, but this is more about a politicians in power not wanting to be held accountable thing and using partisan politics to cover the shield around their asses because they're incompetent pieces of shit. But we'll get to that on a different day because I have to talk about the Pete Hegseth scandal and a modern test case. Now, according to multiple reports, intelligence leaks and statements coming from Capitol Hill, the intelligence leaks and statements are saying that during a military engagement, an order was issued or approved that authorized a second strike on an already shipwrecked bunch of sailors. We call it a double tap, a strike on men no longer in combat, a strike on individuals who under international law are protected persons. Now, this isn't a mistake. This isn't the fog of war. This is an act of the Secretary of War would have been forced to answer for the highest levels. But today, everything gets filtered through a bureaucratic blender of the defense apparatus. Words come out of the other side as protocol deviations, investigative inquiries, operational decisions, or preliminary assessments. The clarity disappears. The moral questions become legally puzzled. The legal puzzle becomes a political football. And truth becomes a hostage and an inconvenience. But something unusual is happening. Even the Senate Republicans and Democrats seems unwilling to let this one pass. They demanded documents. They've opened inquiries. They promised vigorous oversight, a phrase rarely used unless something serious has happened. It's the closest America has come in decades to confronting the truth without euphemism. We've seen this before. Mali in 1968. U.S. soldiers massacred hundreds of Vietnam civilians. The military tried to bury it. Journalists unearthed it. Only one officer, Lieutenant Cayley, was convicted. And then, even then, he was spared from any real consequence. Hadithia in 2005. 24 Iraqi civilians killed. Charges evaporated. Responsibility dissolved into a fog. Nuremberg trials, 1945 to 1946. The world declared a new truth. Following orders is not defense. Iran Flight 655 in 1988. A civilian airliner was shot down by the USS in Venice. Mistaken identity was claimed. Mistaken identity, but no accountability at command level. Each case shows a pattern. When war crimes occur, the system frequently protects itself instead of justice. But there's a difference today. Pete Hegseth is now a ranking officer. He is a political figure, a public personality, a man who cannot be quietly and resign or buried in paperwork. This elevates the stakes dramatically. The moral level, if the allegations are true, then men in distress were killed after they ceased to be combatants. Now that act violates the oldest laws of humanity. You do not kill those who can no longer fight you back. The Geneva Convention is actually pretty clear here. Attacking shipwrecked personnel is a war crime, and under U.S. military law, if a commander orders, encourages, or permits an unlawful strike, he is legally accountable. This is where the pressure cooker is heating up. The Senate has turned bipartisan eyes on the incident, which is extremely rare. Why? Because they understand the stakes. If the United States committed an unlawful killing under color of command, Congress must respond or the entire system loses its legitimacy. This is what makes the story bigger than Pete. This is about whether America is capable of looking itself in the mirror again, like it used to do when we still had a Secretary of War. We are watching now the ghost of the Secretary of War stepping back into the room, demanding answers that the modern system tries to desperately to avoid. The old way said, you waged war, you answered for war. The new way says, you waged war, let's rewrite the vocabulary. But the vocabulary cannot save you from the truth. It's if a civilian dies unlawfully in a strike, no euphemism can be resurrected to resurrect him. No acronym can justify the behavior. No press release can resolve for the action. America has decided. Do we confront this like a nation of laws, or do we bury it like a nation of excuses? So here's the bottom line, as Stone Cold Steve Austin would say. What happened or didn't happen with Pete Hegseth is not simply a scandal. It is a test of whether the United States still believes in the rule of law, a test whether the United States still believes in the ethics of warfare, a test of whether the United States believes in the Constitution and the chain of command, a test if the United States believes in a Geneva Convention and the standards we claim to uphold, a test if the United States of America is willing to be accountable in ways that reaches all the way to the top. We are staring at the same ancient line of humanity has drawn for thousands of years. War is obviously violent, but war has never and cannot be reckless. If the allegations prove true, we must say so. If they prove false, we must say so with clarity. Either way, truth is the only way out of this. Because without truth, without law, without accountability, you do not have a military. You have an armed mob wearing matching uniforms. And if the United States is going to remain a nation worth defending, we must hold our leaders, civilian military, to be the very laws that we expect the world to follow. That is our standard. That is our duty. That is the weight of command. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where the story begins, not where it ends. Thank you for tuning into the Jerome McClain Show. We're going to go to a blast from the intellectual past, and I will see you on the next episode.
You said that if the Nuremberg principles were applied, every post-World War II president would be indictable.
That's probably true.
Can we run down them real fast? What did Eisenhower do that you would indict him for?
Eisenhower overthrew the conservative nationalist government of Iran with a military coup. He overthrew the first and last democratic government in Guatemala by military coup and invasion, leading to years of, in Iran, it led to 25 years of brutal dictatorship, finally overthrown in 1979. In Guatemala, it led to massive atrocities, which are still continuing. That's after almost 50 years. In Indonesia, this wasn't known until recently, but he conducted the major clandestine terror operation of the post-war period up until Cuba and Nicaragua in an effort to break up Indonesia, strip off the outer islands where most of the resources are, and undermine what was then considered as a threat of Indonesian democracy. Indonesia was too free and open. It was allowing a political party of the poor to participate. They were gaining a lot of ground, so that Eisenhower supported and helped instigate a military rebellion in the outer islands. This is just for starters. These are all indictable offenses.
What about Kennedy?
Kennedy was one of the worst. Kennedy, first of all, invaded South Vietnam. During the Eisenhower administration, they had blocked the political settlement in 1954 and instituted a kind of a Latin American style terror state, which had killed maybe 60 or 70,000 people at the end of the Eisenhower period, and had instigated a response. reaction. Kennedy recognized that it couldn't be controlled internally, so he simply invaded. In 1962, about a third of the bombing missions were carried out by the U.S. Air Force in U.S. planes with South Vietnamese insignia, but U.S. pilot. He authorized napalm. He began the use of chemical weapons to destroy food crops. They began programs which drove millions of people into what amounted to concentration camps. Now, that's aggression. In the case of Cuba, it was just a massive campaign of international terrorism, which almost led to the destruction of the world, led to the missile crisis. And we can continue. Again, these are all indictable offenses.
Johnson.
Well, Johnson expanded the war in Indochina to the point where it ended up probably leaving 3 or 4 million people dead. He invaded the Dominican Republic to block what looked like a potential democratic revolution there, supported the Israeli occupation in its early stages. Again, we can go around the world. Take, say, Carter.
I'll get there, but Nixon's next.
Nixon, we don't even have to talk about. We can skip that one, okay? But
Ford, then Ford.
Well, Ford was only there for a short time, but long enough to endorse the Indonesian invasion of East Timor, which became about as close to genocide as anything in the modern period. They pretended to oppose it, but secretly supported, in fact, not so secretly, the U.S., immediately after the invasion, the U.S. did join the rest of the world in formally condemning it at the Security Council. But Ambassador Moynihan was kind enough to explain to us, in his words, that his instructions were to render the United Nations utterly ineffective in any actions it might take to counter the Indonesian invasion. And he says proudly that he did this with considerable success. His next sentence says, in the next few months, it seems that about 60,000 people were killed. And then he goes off to the next topic. That's the first few months, went on to probably hundreds of thousands. Formally, the U.S. announced a boycott of weapons, but secretly it increased the supply of weapons, including counterinsurgency equipment, so that the Indonesians could consummate the invasion. That's just a short period in office, but that's indictable. Seriously, in fact, that's a major war crime. Carter increased, as the Indonesian atrocities were increasing. They peaked in 1978. Carter's flow of weapons to Indonesia increased. When Congress imposed human rights restrictions, by then there was a human rights movement in Congress, to block the flow of advanced weaponry to Indonesia, Carter arranged through Mondale, vice president, to get Israel to send U.S. Skyhawks to Indonesia to enable Indonesia to complete what turned out to be near genocide, killing maybe a quarter of the population or something. In the Middle East, Carter just won the Nobel Prize. His great achievement was the Camp David Agreements. The Camp David Agreements are presented as a diplomatic triumph for the United States. In fact, they were a diplomatic catastrophe. At Camp David, the United States and Israel accepted, finally, Egypt's 1971 offer, which they had then, U.S. had rejected at the time, except that now it was worse from the U.S.-Israeli point of view because it included the Palestinians. In order to get Israel to accept Egypt's 1971 offer, after a major war and atrocities and so on, Carter raised aid, military and other aid to Israel, to more than 50% of total aid worldwide. Israel used it at once in exactly the way they said they were going to do, as every sane person knew. as an opportunity to attack their northern neighbor, first in 1978, then in 1982, and to increase integration of the occupied territories. And that's for starters. We can continue.
Reagan?
I don't think we have to talk about that one either. I mean, Reagan is the first president to have been condemned by the International Court of Justice for what they called the unlawful use of force, meaning international terrorism in the war against Nicaragua. Again, that's just for starters. They also, the Security Council endorsed it in 2 resolutions, both of which were vetoed by the United States.
Bush won.
Well, we can begin with the invasion of Panama. The invasion of Panama, which, according to the Panamanians, killed about 3,000 people, since it's never investigated. We don't know if that's true or not. This was done in order to kidnap a disobedient thug who had been supported by the United States right through his worst atrocities. Noriega, who was brought to Florida and tried for crimes that he committed mostly on the CIA payroll. Okay, that's aggression. We could go into the details of the war in Iraq, but there were plainly opportunities for, they might not have worked, we don't know, but there were opportunities for diplomatic settlement, which the Bush administration refused to consider. And incidentally, the press would not report, with a single exception, and Long Island Newsday, which did report the whole story throughout accurately, and is the only newspaper in the country to have done so. The Bush administration then did attack, and the attack was carried out in a manner which is criminal under the laws of war. They attacked infrastructure. I mean, if you attack New York City and you destroy the electrical system, the power system, the sewage systems, and so on, that amounts to biological warfare, and that's the nature of the attack. Then came a sanctions regime, which mostly Clinton, but began with Bush, which is, by conservative estimates, killed hundreds of thousands of people while strengthening Saddam Hussein. That takes us off to Clinton, which, that's the beginning, but that's by no means the end. We can run through it. Well, we can run through that one case suffices.
All right.
But there are plenty of others.
Bush too?
Let's go on with Clinton.
Okay.
And one of Clinton's minor escapades, very minor, was sending a couple of cruise missiles to the Sudan to destroy what they knew to be a pharmaceutical plant. There was no intelligence failure. According to the only estimates we had from the German ambassador and the regional director of Near East Foundation, who does field work in Sudan, both of them estimate several tens of thousands of deaths from one cruise missile attack. Pretty serious. If somebody did that to us, we'd regard it as bad news. And again, we can continue. In the Middle East, for example, Clinton began by declaring past UN resolutions, in the words of his administration, obsolete and anachronistic. Okay, so we're finished with that. No more international law. Then comes a period called the peace process, except that during the peace process, Israeli settlement, which means settlement paid for by the U.S. taxpayer and supported by U.S. military aid and diplomacy, continually increased. The most extreme year was Clinton's last year, the highest level of settlement, the highest since 1992. Meanwhile, the territories were cantonized, broken up into small regions with infrastructure projects and new settlement. I don't know what you call that, but it's under military occupation. And if anyone else was doing it, we'd call it a war crime. And again, we can continue. Bush too, I don't think we have to discuss.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.